Hey everyone, Dr. D here, and in this video we are going to be covering Chapter 16 from our Brock Biology of Microorganisms textbook covering diversity of bacteria. So let's go ahead and get started.
Dr. D, 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 Dr. D. Explain stuff.
All right, welcome back. So in this chapter, we are looking at 4 phyla of bacteria in particular, these 4 right here. The reason being more than 90% of characterized genre and species come from these 4 phyla of bacteria. We're going to start with the Proteobacteria. Now, there are several classes of Proteobacteria: the alpha Proteobacteria, the beta Proteobacteria, gamma Proteobacteria. There's other Proteobacteria. And so we're going to go through each class of Proteobacteria. Again, the Proteobacteria is a phyla, and it's a diverse phylum of bacteria. These are gram-negative bacteria. They are divided into these classes. Remember I said alpha Proteobacteria, beta, delta, gamma, epsilon, zeta. These are the various classes of Proteobacteria. So the alpha Proteobacteria is the first class we're going to discuss. Many of these are oligotropic. What does that mean? That means that they are able to grow under low nutrient concentrations. Here are some major orders under the class. And recall kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. You guys remember that taxonomy hierarchy? We should recall that, a phylum is a, large group of organisms. And so underneath phylum, you have the class Alpha Proteobacterium. And then underneath the class, you would have the order, these various orders, right? So we're talking about taxonomy. So it's helpful to remember the hierarchy of taxonomy. Now, let's go ahead and start with this group of Alpha Proteobacteria. I selected Ricketsiales, which include these genera, Rickettsia being the most interesting. These are obligate intracellular parasites or mutualists of animals. So these organisms live inside of your cells. And I picked Rickettsia because it is the causative agent of several human diseases, including typhus and Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Oftentimes, these Rickettsia are spread by arthropods, biting insects, including ticks, fleas, lice, and mites. Here you can see the Rickettsia growing within a host cell, this one being Rickettsia rickettsii. Now, moving on to the next class of Proteobacteria, the beta Proteobacteria. Again, this is a major group with 500 various species. Here are some orders that you would find, some orders underneath this class. And the one that I picked out was Neiseriales. Again, the Neiseriales include a genus called Neisseria, which can cause human diseases. Some of these Neisseria are pathogenic, including Neisseria gonorrhoeae, the causative agent of the sexually transmitted disease gonorrhea. Here you can see the shape and arrangement of the Neisseria gonorrhoeae. They are a diplococcus-shaped bacterium, right? So it's a coccus shape, but a diplo arrangement, right? So they are diplococcus. Now, we're moving on to the next class of Proteobacteria, the gamma Proteobacteria. These include the Enterobacteriales. Remember in lab, we have an unknown project, and I told you in lab that your unknown, your gram-negative unknown belongs to the Enterobacteriaceae, which is the family of Enterobacteriales. These are the enteric bacteria. Enteric meaning they're typically gut bacteria, okay? Key genre here includes some of the genre that might be your unknown. You might identify one of your unknowns as one of these genre. These are the genre in the family Enterobacteriaceae. These are very diverse. Again, the Enterobacteriales are known as the enteric bacteria. They are found in the intestines, in the guts of animals. They are facultative aerobes. They're all gram-negative because all proteobacteria are gram-negative. They are oxidase negative, catalase positive. Now, there's fermentation patterns in enteric bacteria that are different. There are two broad groups of these enteric bacteria based on the type and proportion of fermentation products they generate from glucose. So some of these enteric bacteria are known as mixed acid fermenters, and some are known as 2,3-butanediol fermenters. The mixed acid fermenters can produce acidic, lactic, succinic acid in large amounts. They can also produce ethanol, CO2, hydrogen with CO2 and hydrogen gas. These include Escherichia, Salmonella, Shigella, Citrobacter, Proteus, Yersinia, while the 2,3-butanediol fermenters, these produce butanediol, ethanol, CO2, hydrogen gas as their main products, and a smaller amounts of acids are formed. These include the Enterobacter, Klebsiella, Erwinia, and Serratia. Now, of the mixed acid fermenters, let's talk about a few examples. Escherichia. You know, this is the genus of E. coli. The E in E. coli stands for Escherichia. They synthesize vitamins for us. They are universal inhabitants of our intestinal tract in humans and other warm-blooded animals. It's the most commonly studied bacteria and best described bacteria, though some strains can be pathogenic. Salmonella. What about Salmonella and Shigella? These are closely related to Escherichia, but these are almost always pathogenic. Salmonella causes a disease known as typhoid fever. Sorry, this is a typo here. It should be typhoid fever and gastroenteritis, while Shigella causes bacillary dysentery, essentially bloody diarrhea. Now, of the mixed acid fermenters, let's talk about Proteus. Proteus is a highly motile bacterium. It is peritrichous, and it is known for its motility. In fact, if you plate Proteus on an agar plate, you'll see them exhibit this swarming behavior where they're actually swimming across the agar. And so it's hard to characterize an individual colony because they're swimming out from that colony, giving you this swarming colony morphology on a plate. Okay. Now moving on to the butanediol fermenters. Let's start with Enterobacter aerogenes, found in water, sewage, intestinal tracts. These can cause UTIs, urinary tract infections. Klebsiella, including Klebsiella pneumoniae, which occasionally can cause pneumonia. And remember what I said in class, pneumonia simply means inflammation and fluid in the lung. And this is one example of a microbe that can cause pneumonia, but there are many different microbes that can cause pneumonia. Serratia. Serratia is really neat. It can form a red pyrrole containing pigment, and you can often see when Serratia grows on a plate, it's going to grow with a red pigmentation. These can also cause infection. All right, moving on to the gamma proteobacteria. The gamma proteobacteria, including Pseudomonadales and Vibrionales. Key genre here are listed. Let's start with the Pseudomonadales. These are aerobic, respiratory, chemoorganotrophs. They can sometimes cause diseases in animals and plants. And I wanted to show you this one, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, because we often study this one in the lab. It is associated with opportunistic UTI, urinary and respiratory diseases. The Vibrionales are even more pathogenic. The Vibrionales are mostly aquatic. Then they include Vibrio cholera, which causes cholera in humans, but not other hosts. Cholera, remember, it's characterized by diarrhea and loss of fluid, which can result in death. Now moving on to the Delta class, Delta Proteobacteria, and the class Epsilon Proteobacteria. The Delta Proteobacteria include key genre here listed, 8 different orders, and some include these bacterial predators. The Mycoplasmas and the Vibrionales are predators. They're bacteria that behave somewhat similar to viruses. They can infect. You can think of it as an infect. They can invade other bacteria, grow within those bacteria, deprive them of nutrients, and then destroy those bacteria and release so that they can infect other bacteria. Now, what about the Epsilon Proteobacteria? Moving on to the Epsilon Proteobacteria. Here are some key genre: Campylobacter, Helicobacter. What's interesting about these? These are mostly pathogenic to humans and animals. Campylobacter, for instance, can cause acute gastroenteritis, so inflammation in the intestines, resulting in bloody diarrhea. While Helicobacter pylori is really interesting, this one can cause your peptic ulcer disease. It can cause ulcers in the stomach, as well as acute gastritis. Now, before we move on to the Firmicutes, our next major phyla, so we're moving from Proteobacteria, the phyla Proteobacteria, and now we're moving on to our second phyla, the Firmicutes. Before we do, let's take a quick break time with Gizmo and Wicket, and we'll be right back. Hey everyone, welcome back from break time with Gizmo and Wicket. Let's carry on with our discussion of diversity of microorganisms, of bacteria with the Firmicutes, the Tenericutes, and the Actinobacteria. So all of these are gram-positive bacteria. These are known as the gram-positive bacteria here. So let's start with the Firmicutes. An example, Lactobacillales. Now, the key genre here are the Lactobacillus and the Streptococcus, fermentative bacteria that produce lactic acid. Now, what I want you to know mainly is about the Lactobacillus. Rod-shaped bacterium that grow in chains. You can find them in dairy products. If you've ever had yogurt, you've ingested your fair share of Lactobacillus. They're resistant to acidic conditions, grow in low pH. And remember, this Firmicutes also includes Streptococcus, as well as other cocci. Now, Lactococcus and Streptococcus contain homofermentative coccoid lactic acid bacteria. These are sometimes pathogenic. Streptococcus, remember, these grow in chains of coccus-shaped bacterium. Sometimes they can grow as tetrads. These are important in production of buttermilk, silage, and other fermented products. And they can form dental caries. Remember, Streptococcus mutans is a very common bacterium that causes cavities or dental caries. Lactococcus is of dairy significance in the production of certain dairy products. Enterococcus, these, remember, Enterococcus, enter means in the guts, so these are of fecal origin. So let's talk about the Streptococcus. The two groups of Streptococci, pyogenes, which causes strep throat, and mutans, which causes dental caries. Now moving on to other key genre of Firmicutes, we have Listeria, Staphylococcus, and Sarsinia. Let's start with Listeria. Remember, Listeria outbreak in Bluebell ice cream. This can cause foodborne illness if you get it in contaminated food. Staphylococcus, a very important skin bacterium. The reason you find Staphylococcus on the skin is because it's resistant to drying of the skin and resistant to high salt conditions. So they are known as halophiles, which can grow on the skin. Two common residents of human skin are the Staphylococcus epidermidis as well as the Staphylococcus aureus. Now moving on to the Bacillales and the Clostridiales. Remember, these are endospore-forming bacterium. Okay, these are the endospore-forming gram-positive Firmicutes. Only members of Bacillus and Clostridium are capable of forming endospores. We really need to know that. These are generally found in soils. And remember, those endospores are an advantage for these microorganisms because they are so resistant to nutrient levels, temperature, water activity, chemicals, UV, etc. So let's talk about Bacillus first. In fact, if I could be any bacteria in the world, I would choose to be a member of the genus Bacillus. Why? Because not only can bacilli, or Bacillus, I should say, form endospores when the going gets tough, but many bacilli produce antibiotics as well, which kill other bacterium. And so not only do they have great defense in the form of endospores, but they have great offense in the form of antibiotics. Now, Clostridium, this is, again, another very important group because it is capable of forming endospores as well, and some are pathogenic. Remember Clostridium botulinum, which causes botulism, Clostridium tetani, which causes tetanus, among others. Now, moving on to the Tenericutes, you know, these Mycoplasma used to belong to Firmicutes, but because they technically lack a cell wall, they are now in this phyla Tenericutes, which are known as the Mycoplasmas. So the Mycoplasmas lack a cell wall, often called Mycoplasmas because Mycoplasma is best characterized. Okay, again, they are related to Firmicutes. They used to be in the phylum Firmicutes, and now they are in their own phylum. So what are some properties of Mycoplasmas? They have an absence of cell walls. However, they're still resistant to osmotic lysis, mainly because they have sterols in their plasma membranes, which makes them more stable than other bacteria. So even though they don't have a peptidoglycan cell wall, they're not so susceptible to osmotic stress as you would think. So again, because these mycoplasmas lack a cell wall, they are pleomorphic, which means they don't have a particular shape. And when these mycoplasmas grow on a plate, on an agar plate, the colony morphology is that of a fried egg. So the colony on a plate looks like a little fried egg. Now, moving on to another phyla, the Actinobacteria. Okay, again, these are also gram-positive bacterium. Okay, here are some key genera. Now, many of these Actinobacterium are either rod-shaped or filamentous. Filamentous meaning hyphal shape, sort of like think of a mold cell, how it's filamentous or hyphal. These Actinobacteria can be filamentous, though some are also rod-shaped. Let's talk about these Corynebacterium, which are an example. The Corynebacterium are diverse, but some include important pathogens such as C. diphtheria or Corynebacterium diphtheria, which causes diphtheria. Now, this is a respiratory disease in humans, but you probably have not encountered it because there's a vaccine. Early on, you get a vaccine, the Tdap vaccine, and that vaccinates you against diphtheria. Mycobacterium. What are the Mycobacterium? Remember from lab, the Mycobacterium are the ones that exhibit acid fastness because they have mycolic acids on their surface. This waxy mycolic acid on the surface, these are known as the acid-fast bacterium. And a big example here is Mycobacterium tuberculosis, which causes TB. It causes tuberculosis. Here you can see a mycolic acid. This is the structure found in the cell wall or in the cell membrane of these bacteria. Okay, and this is the basic fusion which stains that cell wall. Okay, now more about Mycobacterium. Remember, Mycobacterium tuberculosis is the causative agent of tuberculosis. Moving on to the filamentous Actinobacteria, okay? There are filamentous examples here. The Streptomyces, Actinomyces. The Actinomyces are filamentous, gram-positive bacteria. They produce hyphae, which are filaments. And they, when these filaments grow together, they form a mycelium, much like a fungi does. And not only do they look like fungi because of their fuzzy appearance, but they are able to use their hyphae to differentiate into spores, not endospores, but reproductive spores that can disseminate for survival and dispersal. The Streptomyces as well. The Streptomyces are also these soil bacteria that are filamentous, and they can also form spores called conidia spores, much like a fungus. So here you can see a young colony of Actinomycetes, the genus Nocardia. You can see the filamentous shape of the bacterium. Here you can see with those filamentous, the hyphal shape of Streptomyces, how that there's a growth phase followed by a curling of the tip of the cell, a partitioning, and then the cell walls thicken and constrict to form spores. These are reproductive asexual spores that can disseminate, much like mold spores. Now, when it rains and you go outside and take a big whiff and smell the earth, that moist earth smell, that earthy odor smell is jasmine. It is a chemical released by Streptomyces. So these Streptomyces, they constitute 1 to 20% of soil microbiota. And so they are so prevalent in soil, They are producing geosmin. They are responsible for moist earth smell. It's really neat. And these Streptomyces can produce antibiotics as well. 50% of all isolated Streptomyces produce some kind of antibiotic. So there's over 500 distinct antibiotics produced by Streptomyces. Very neat, right? So they produce antibiotics. So I want you to know that there are two groups of bacterium that make antibiotics, right? There are the bacillus, which we talked about. Remember bacillus, as well as the Streptomyces. So the two groups are bacillus and Streptomyces. Now, moving on to the Chlamydia. These are gram-negative bacterium. Okay, gram-negative. So let's start with Chlamydia. Chlamydia are obligate intracellular parasites of eukaryotes. Here's the life cycle of Chlamydia, and here is the life cycle. The life cycle of Chlamydia involves a elementary body as well as a reticulate body. The elementary body is a small, dense cell resistant to drying and means of dispersal. The reticulate body is the vegetative form that divides by binary fission. So you can think of the elementary body as the dormant stage that can be extracellular, and the reticulate body is the growing stage that's inside of your cells that's growing and dividing. Here we can see the life cycle of this Chlamydia. Let's start here with the elementary body, which is the extracellular form. The elementary body attaches to the host cell, and then it triggers phagocytosis by the host cell. It then converts from the elementary body to the reticulate body, which grows as a vegetative cell within the host cell. And remember, it undergoes binary fission, so you have multiplication of the reticulate bodies. And then once they mature, they convert to elementary bodies, which then scatter, which then disperse out of the host cell in order to infect more cells. So again, the best studied human pathogens are Chlamydia and Chlamydiophila. The Chlamydiophila pstachyi causes sassiosis in birds and humans. Chlamydia trachomatis causes blindness in humans, and the STD, the sexually transmitted disease, as well. Great. Well, we ended this chapter. We took a look at various phyla of bacteria. We took a look at the diversity of these different phyla, these different groups, and we noted some of these characteristics they have. Hopefully this was fun, a little tour of bacterium, and you have an appreciation for their diversity and the types of bacterium that lie within those four major phyla that we discussed. So let's wrap it up, and we'll catch you for chapter 24.
Dr. D, Dr. D, Dr. D. Dr. D, Dr. D, Dr. D. A Dr. D, Dr. D, Dr. D. Dr. D, Dr. D, Dr. D. A Dr. D, Dr. D, Dr. D. Dr. D, Dr. D, Dr. D. A Dr. D, Dr. D, Dr. D. Dr. D, Dr. D, Dr. D.